Okay, so good evening, everyone. In this video or in this lecture, we will talk about ethnography, which is a qualitative research methodology. When we say ethnography, this is actually a research about the culture of a certain group of people. It's actually the work of describing the culture, telling what the culture is all about, telling what's in it, telling what's the structure of it, and how it's related to each other. When you study the culture in ethnography, it's not just studying the people. You're not there to study only the behavior of the people. You are actually a part of that group of people. So it means that doing an ethnography is actually learning about people. It's learning on how they live. It's learning on how they interact. It's learning how they socialize with each other. So it means that in ethnography, it is a requirement that each and every one of you should be living with the people that you are learning. Okay? So you live with the people and you live with them. Now, ethnography has four major schools of thought. Okay? There are four major ethnographic schools of thought. The first one is what you call your classical ethnography. When we say classical ethnography, it aims to describe everything about the culture. Describe what you see, describe what you observe, describe what you understand about the culture of the people that you are learning. When we talk of the second one, which is your systematic ethnography, you're looking or you're focusing your look at the structure of the culture. What organizes the study groups or your population's life ways? All right. The third ethnographic school of thought is what you call your interpretive, okay, interpretive ethnography, okay, wherein you're interested in studying the culture through the analysis of inferences and implications of how the behavior of your in the behavior of the people or of the study group. Now, another important aspect of or another important school of thought in ethnography is what you call your critical ethnography. In critical ethnography, you are interested in studying the culture, okay, your culture based on its non-existence, okay, but on the existence of a cultural schema, okay. It's actually focusing on the injustices and oppression, very much like to the Marxist theory, no, of society. So in critical ethnography, you're understanding people's behavior, people's culture by the effects, no, of historical accounts, social accounts, and economic situations. Okay. Now, when you do an ethnography, you have to understand, no, its fundamental characteristics. When you do an ethnography, it's very much different, no, with your regular research, because the primary research instrument or the tool to collect your data, okay, in the culture will be you, the researcher himself. You being the researcher, you are the tool that will describe, no, the culture of the people. It requires intimacy, no, with the participants who are part of the culture. So therefore, ethnography as a method of inquiry provides the opportunity for researchers to conduct studies that focus on personal and sometimes intimate experiences of the members based on what you see. Okay? Which is why the ethnographer becomes now the conduit of information shared by the group. It means that you are the passageway of the information, of the culture, of of the group of people that you are observing, you're living in. Okay? When we talk of ethnographers as research instrument, they are indicating that the researcher plays an important role in identifying, interpreting, and analyzing the culture that you are studying. Now, another characteristic of ethnography is what you call your field work. When we say field work, it requires the researchers to be always on site, to be always at the site where culture occurred. So you have to do field work. You have to be always outside to get the culture, to understand it, and to observe it. So it means to say that ethnography requires field work, okay? Requires immersion, no, to the culture that you are studying. Now, another characteristic of ethnography is that the nature of data collection and analysis is cyclic. When we say cyclic, it's always repeating, it's always continue. The process of interviewing, observing, reviewing the materials, and analyzing those data, and returning to the field to do more interviews, that's the real work of ethnographers. So it doesn't stop when you collect your data at one point in ethnography, because in ethnography, you need to continuously validate the life ways of the people that you are studying, so that you will know what are the collective meanings, you will know what are the collective artifacts of the group. Okay? Now, another important aspect of the ethnography is the focus on the culture. Okay? Because in ethnography, it is the only research method whose sole purpose is to understand, okay, the life ways of individuals connected through group membership. Another characteristic of ethnography is the depth and length of participation. Usually, when you do an ethnography, it requires almost a year or more than 2 years to properly collect data, because much of the life ways of the people cannot be understood in a single data collection. So ethnographers, or those who are doing ethnography, are usually doing it for more than 12 months. It takes time because they are there to immerse themselves to the culture. Okay, because they have to live, so that they can learn properly. And last, the last characteristic of ethnography is that it is characterized by its reflexivity, or the ability or the struggle between the researcher's point of view, and telling the culture from the insider's point of view. So when we say telling the culture based on insider's point of view, that's what we call your emic perspective. No? For example, if you are the group of people that I will be studying, your perspective on a certain social issue will be the emic perspective. Okay? Now, emic perspective is important because this is the real life way of the people being observed. It's different from ethic perspective. When we say ethic perspective in ethnography, ethic perspective means this is the point of view of the researcher, which is, for example, I'm the one observing you. My perspective on your point of view. Now that's different from the emic perspective, because my ethic perspective is influenced by my bias, influenced by my perceptions, influenced by my life views as well. Okay, painting the emic perspective. So the more important concept when doing ethnography is reflecting the emic perspective, okay, of the people that you are studying. Okay. Now, when do you use uh, ethnography as a method? Well, as we have mentioned earlier, one of the goals of ethnography is to make explicit what is implicit within a culture. So it means that you're going to reflect, no, what's in the backstage or the latent culture, in addition to what is explicit or public or manifested aspects of culture. Now, cultural knowledge requires an understanding of the people, what they do, what they say, how they relate to one another, and what their customs and beliefs are. Okay? And how they derive meaning from their experience. So for us as educators, there are actually lots of undiscovered cultures. Okay? The way students choose or prefer for their teacher is an undiscovered culture. The way students learn inside the classroom based on their cultural background and upbringing is also an undiscovered culture, and many much more. So therefore, if you want to understand these cultures, understand these different perspectives, you have to use ethnography. Now, when doing an ethnography, there are several methods, okay, of interpreting the data. Okay, the first one is the holistic interpretation, or as a whole. No, the holistic interpretation refers to the oldest tradition of ethnographic interpretation. So the commitment of theories of the researchers is to study the culture as an integrated whole. So it means that you look at the culture in its holistic point of view as a whole and not by parts. Okay. Another important interpretation method in ethnography is what you call your semiotic or individual viewpoint. Semiotic interpretation focuses on gaining access to the native's viewpoint. No? It means that you view the culture not as a mean to define the law, okay, or the law that guides the whole culture, but as an interpretive enterprise focused on searching for meaning. Therefore, to get the meaning of the whole culture, or you have to achieve cultural understanding, you have to do or collect 6 descriptions. Okay? It means that you need to collect large amounts of data collected over extended periods of time. So it means that in what you call this, in ethnography, it's important, no, to collect data over extended periods of time so that you can understand, no, the individual viewpoint and do semiotic interpretation. Now, the third interpretation model of ethnography is what you call your holistic or your behavioral, no, behavioral interpretation. Now, ethnographers use this approach, no, are most interested in the behavior of members of the culture. The main goal is to uncover the patterns, no, in the observed behavior. Okay, this approach is actually deductive, meaning ethnographers using this method, no, will look specifically for cultural situations that substantiate pre-selected categories of data. So the use of this interpretation deviates radically from the intent of the other 2 interpretations, which relies solely on induction. So the first 2 is actually inductive in nature. It means that you start with smaller pieces of data and then combine them to make a whole understanding of the culture. But it's different with behavioral. In behavioral, you look at a certain condition and then see whether one part of it will apply to each situation. And if it connects to this great body of knowledge, then we can interpret how the people are behaving. So that's how behavioral interpretation goes. Now, how do we do the process of ethnography? Okay, doing the process of ethnography involves the first one, no, which is to understand the research role. It means that we need to understand what we are, or what's our role in data collection, and what's our role in the community. Next is to gain access. Gaining access means we identify the culture that we want to study. Third is to make participant observation. When we say participant observation, we make ourselves part of the culture that we are studying. So when we go inside the culture, we live the ways of the people. We live the ways that they live. No? There's a saying that goes that when in Rome, do what the Romans do. So it's like the participant observation. Okay, when you are in their lives, you have to do what they are doing. Okay, in ethnography. Next is to make an ethnographic record. Okay, an ethnographic record is an initial understanding of the place that you are studying. So you write there, you try to understand what's the situation, no? On the prima facie basis, meaning on the first look basis. Now, the next step is to make descriptive observations. Now that you have lived the life of the people, you're starting to living with them. During the course of your immersion to the community, you make descriptive observations. Okay, you describe the space, okay, where the physical location of the action or of the event is taking place, the actors that in that particular case, okay, the activities or what they do, the objects that are involved, the acts or the actions that they perform, even the event, the time, the goals, and your personal feelings, no, make up your descriptive observation. Now, after making your descriptive observation, you do now the first layer of analysis. Okay, the first layer of analysis in ethnography is making domain analysis. When we say making domain analysis, you look on the particular situation that has cultural meaning. Let's say, for example, in a house where they are eating, you observe that a group of people are eating together at the same time in the evening. They are eating together at dinner at 7 p.m. And you took particular notice of this situation. Now, that particular analysis, upon seeing that there's meaning in it, okay, that's already your domain analysis, because you try to understand a certain part of their lives. Do you get me? So that's particular situation. Now, after that, you make focused observations. Again, you go back to the situation, you observe why is it important, you observe what happens during that time. Okay? Then after you have observed or made more focused observation, that's the time that you do a taxonomic analysis. What are the structures? What are the different components, or what are the structures of that particular situation, of that particular culture? So you try to understand its structure. Okay? So when we say structure, it means that what's the relationship of each what's the meaning of eating together, and how is it related to the culture and to the family and the likes. So that's taxonomic analysis. After doing a taxonomic analysis, you go back again to make a selective observation. Okay? So it's a more finer form of observation, and look now on the individual components of that particular culture. So after you have done your selective observation, you make a componential analysis. Okay, the last layer of analysis in ethnography. Now, of course, after writing your componential analysis, the final step is to write the cultural themes. Okay? Now, when you do your ethnography, always remember these ethical considerations. Okay? Like informed consent. Okay? Because you're living with the lives of the people, of your study subject, okay? Or of your people that you're learning to, you need to get informed consent. You ask them, is it okay to observe their lives? Because you are actually intruding in their lives when you do observe them. So first and foremost, you need to get the informed consent. Okay. Sometimes there's a risk also to the study population. More often than not, doing ethnography would involve or would usually involve the cultural minority. Now, it may be a risk, to this population because they are vulnerable, they are powerless in society because of the fact that they are cultural minority. Okay, and sometimes they are powerless to protect themselves. So we have to make sure that this risk should be mitigated and should be avoided. And lastly, in doing ethical ethnography, you should have an ability to do the research. Usually, ethnography is done by groups of researchers. Okay, there's a supervisor and there are apprentices. Now, the apprentices are guided by the supervisor because there are very few people who are capable of doing ethnography. So they have to be guided by their supervisor before they can perform ethnography by themselves. So the ability of the researcher to do the research should be taken into consideration when you do your um, ethnography. Okay, and that ends my lecture for this topic. Thank you very much.